Ava never expected her protector to stand over her with a weapon in the dark. Alex Volkov was a man of cold secrets and lethal promises. He was supposed to keep her safe, but that night, the rules between them finally broke. The shift in their lives began weeks earlier on a night defined by a relentless, soaking rain. Ava stood on a street corner, her gear tucked away after a professional photography shoot for the Graysons, watching the water pool at her feet. She was stranded, waiting for an Uber that seemed destined never to arrive, yet she refused to let the gloom dampen her spirit. That was Ava's way. She looked for the light in the gray, jokingly telling herself that as long as she wasn't being chased by a bear, things weren't truly that bad. When her brother, Josh, called to check on her, their usual playful bickering provided a brief distraction from the cold. Josh had always been her anchor, the protective older brother who had shielded her since a childhood accident left a gap in her memories. He promised to send a friend to fetch her, but the relief Ava felt vanished the moment a sleek, black Aston Martin pulled to the curb. The window rolled down to reveal Alex Volkov. To Ava, Alex was a glacier in a bespoke suit. He was Josh's best friend, but he was also the most intimidating man she had ever met, aloof, impossibly handsome, and seemingly devoid of human warmth. The drive to her brother's farewell party was thick with a tension that made the air in the car feel heavy. Alex drove in a silence so profound it felt robotic. When Ava tried to break the ice with small talk, he met her efforts with short, sharp redirections. Eventually, her patience snapped. She lashed out, calling him exactly what she thought he was being, an asshole. Alex didn't flinch. He simply navigated the rain, his expression unreadable, leaving Ava to wonder why someone so cold felt so much like a magnetic force. The party itself was a blur of bittersweet goodbyes. Josh was preparing to leave for a year-long volunteer trip to Central America, leaving his life in Washington, D.C. behind. But he wasn't leaving Ava truly alone. In a move that felt both caring and suffocating, Josh had arranged for Alex to move into the house right next door to Ava. He wanted someone he trusted to keep an eye on her, especially since she was still reeling from a recent breakup with her ex, Liam. The transition happened quickly. For days, Ava watched from her window as movers carried minimalist, expensive furniture into the house next door. Despite her reservations, she decided to attempt a fresh start. She baked a batch of her famous red velvet cookies and walked them over as a peace offering. To her surprise, the man who usually treated her like an inconvenience actually invited her inside. His home was just like him, stark, sophisticated, and perfectly ordered. As they spoke, a startling detail emerged about the way Alex experienced the world. He revealed that he possessed hypothymesia, a rare condition that allowed him to remember every single moment of his life with perfect clarity. The revelation struck a chord with Ava. While Alex was burdened by the weight of every memory, Ava lived with the opposite struggle. Her childhood was a fragmented puzzle. She believed her mother had died in a car accident, but beyond that, the early years of her life were a blank space. The contrast between them was haunting. Alex remembered everything, including the tragic loss of his own parents and the cold fire of vengeance his uncle Ivan had stoked in him. Ava, meanwhile, was haunted by what she couldn't remember. That night, and many nights after, she was plagued by a recurring nightmare. In the dream, she was drowning, gasping for air as a woman pushed her deep into dark, cold water. She didn't know who the woman was, and she had no reason to connect the figure to her past, but the terror of the water felt more real than any memory she possessed. Seeking a way to navigate this new, forced proximity with Alex, Ava turned to her inner circle. Over coffee at their favorite spot, her friends, Jules, Stella, and Bridget, listened as she described Alex's stifling presence. Jules, never one to back down from a challenge, proposed a game, Operation Emotion. The goal was simple: test Alex's icy exterior through 5 distinct phases: sadness, disgust, happiness, fear, and jealousy. If Alex Volkov was human, they were determined to find the proof. The jealousy phase arrived sooner than expected, though not by Ava's design. During a boudoir photography session at her home, Ava was posing for a colleague named Owen. She was exploring her own confidence, dressed in a way she never would have around her brother. The door burst open, and Alex stood there, his eyes dark with a sudden, violent protectiveness. He didn't just interrupt, he dominated the room. He viewed Owen as a threat and used his considerable influence to force the photographer to delete every image. Ava was furious, asserting her independence and demanding to know why he thought he had the right to control her. The argument left them both breathless, the air between them vibrating with a new, dangerous energy that neither was willing to name. The sadness phase followed shortly after. Feeling a strange guilt for their constant fighting, Ava decided to try a softer approach. She showed up at Alex's door with a stack of tearjerker movies, including A Walk to Remember, hoping to see a crack in his armor. She found him dressed for a date with a woman named Madeline, a realization that sparked a sharp, unexpected sting of jealousy in her own chest. Against his better judgment, Alex cancelled his plans. They sat together in the flickering light of the television, the physical space between them shrinking as the movie played. Alex warned her that she was too trusting, that she didn't understand how dangerous the world, and men like him, could be. Yet, when a comical misunderstanding about the movie's plot broke the tension, they shared a rare moment of genuine connection. Alex looked at her not as his friend's little sister, but as a woman who was slowly becoming the center of his world. The final shift occurred during a violent summer storm. The heavy downpour proved too much for Ava's aging roof, and a leak in her bedroom forced her to seek refuge next door. Alex offered her his master suite, the only room fully prepared for a guest. As the thunder rolled outside, the proximity became unavoidable. They were sharing a bed, a line they both knew they shouldn't cross, yet the pull was too strong to resist. In the middle of the night, the nightmare returned. Ava began to thrash, caught in the grip of the dark water and the woman's hands pressing her down. Beside her, Alex bolted upright. His instincts, honed by years of trauma and a need for constant vigilance, took over. He reached for the weapon he kept by the bed, standing over her in the dark, ready to face an intruder. But there was no intruder. There was only Ava, trapped in a memory she couldn't name. As her panic subsided, Alex set the weapon aside. He didn't move back to his side of the bed. Instead, he stayed close, watching her as she drifted back into a fitful sleep. In that quiet, dark room, he realized that his mission to simply watch over her had failed. He no longer wanted to just protect her for Josh's sake, he wanted her for himself. The icy detachment he had cultivated for years was finally beginning to melt, replaced by a devotion that was as fierce as it was terrifying. Alex had a heart of ice and a memory that never forgot a debt. When the woman who pushed Ava into the pool felt his hand tighten around her throat, she realized too late that Alex didn't just protect his property, he destroyed anyone who threatened it. The morning following the great storm began in the quiet, sterile luxury of Alex's master suite. Ava woke to a warmth she didn't recognize, only to find herself tangled in the sheets of Alex's bed, her body pressed against his in the aftermath of her night terrors. The air was thick with an immediate, pulsing awkwardness. As she scrambled to untangle herself, the friction between them was no longer just about annoyance. There was a spark there, a magnetic pull that made her heart race even as she hurried to leave. Before she could escape back to her own house, Alex pinned her with a look, his voice low and mocking as he used the nickname Sunshine to describe her persistent, bright optimism. It was a joke, but the way he said it felt like a claim. Ava tried to bury that feeling by throwing herself into her routine. At the pet shelter with her friend Bridget, she attempted to focus on the wagging tails and the impending departure of Bridget's bodyguard, Booth, who was heading off on paternity leave. But her mind kept drifting back to the man next door. She was determined to prove he had a soul, or at the very least, a breaking point. This determination fueled the next phases of Operation Emotion. Ava decided to tackle the disgust phase first. She spent an afternoon in her kitchen concocting the most offensive cookies imaginable, a chaotic blend of asparagus, raisins, and garlic brittle. She presented them to Alex while he was in the middle of preparing for a high-stakes conference call, insisting he play the role of the appreciative neighbor. Alex, ever the machine, took a bite without a single flinch. He looked her in the eye and calmly told her they were fine, leaving Ava convinced that he truly was a robot. She didn't fare much better with the happiness phase. She dragged him to Meridian Hill Park for a meticulously planned picnic, hoping the sun and the scenery would coax a genuine smile from him. Instead, Alex spent the afternoon complaining about the dirt, the heat, and the general inconvenience of the outdoors. The experiment ended in a comedic disaster when a passing dog decided Alex's expensive shoes were the perfect place to relieve itself. As Alex stared down at his ruined footwear with cold, silent fury, Ava realized that making him happy was going to be a much steeper climb than she had anticipated. But the light-heartedness of her experiments was soon eclipsed by the shadows of her past. While out at a bar called The Crypt with Jules and Bridget, the doors swung open to reveal a ghost, her ex-boyfriend, Liam. He looked polished, but his eyes were wild with a reckless, desperate edge. He cornered Ava, pleading for a second chance, but the more she refused, the more his charm curdled into aggression. When he grabbed her wrist, refusing to let go, something in Ava shifted. She didn't wait for a protector. She moved instinctively, kneeing him hard in the groin and leaving him doubled over as she retreated to the safety of her friends. For the first time, she saw Liam for what he truly was, not a lost love, but a dangerous man she no longer knew. The tension followed her to the Thayer University alumni gala. Alex was there in his element, a predator in a tuxedo, circling the room to gather intelligence and secure a hostile takeover of a rival company. He was cold, calculating, and focused, until he saw Ava. She looked stunning, drawing the eyes of every man in the room, including a former classmate named Colton and the ever-persistent Liam. Alex's possessiveness flared with a violence that surprised even him. He didn't just watch from afar, he moved in like a winter storm. He pulled Colton away with a thinly veiled threat disguised as business, and when he finally found Ava alone with Liam, the intervention was far less civil. Alex defended her with a terrifying intensity, physically shielding her and unleashing a fury that made it clear Liam was lucky to still be standing. In the quiet aftermath of the gala, the bargain they had made, self-defense lessons for a photography session, came due. Ava set up a studio, hoping the controlled environment would help her capture the man behind the mask. But as the camera clicked, she realized she couldn't find the real Alex through a lens alone. She challenged him, teasing him about his happiest memories, trying to provoke a reaction. Alex broke his silence then. He stepped into her space, the air between them turning electric. He didn't just answer her, he dared her to admit the truth of the chemistry that had been simmering for weeks. He touched her, a brief, searing contact that proved his point, before pulling away and leaving her breathless and bewildered in the empty studio. When she later developed the photos, she saw it. In one frame, the camera had caught a raw, fleeting moment of desire in Alex's eyes. He wasn't a robot, he was a man who was fighting a war against his own feelings. That softer side of him emerged in the quiet moments that followed. As Ava struggled with the weight of her childhood trauma and the feelings of inadequacy her family had instilled in her, Alex offered a perspective she had never heard. He told her, with a quiet conviction, that love shouldn't be something she had to earn or work for, it should be given freely. It was a moment of profound support that did more to heal her than any apology from her past. But the fragile peace was shattered at a party hosted by the House family. Madeline, Alex's former flame, had been watching Ava with a growing, toxic jealousy. She cornered Ava by the pool, her words sharp and cruel, mocking Ava's supposed innocence and her inability to handle a man like Alex. Ava fought back with a newfound sass, refusing to be bullied, but Madeline took the confrontation a step too far. With a sudden, violent shove, Madeline sent Ava spiraling into the deep end of the pool. For Ava, it wasn't just water. It was the nightmare made real. As she sank, the old terror of the woman in the dark water flooded her mind. She was paralyzed, her phobia of drowning stripping away her ability to fight. Alex arrived to find a scene of chaos. He saw the video of the push, and the rage that consumed him was absolute. He didn't just help Ava, he turned on Madeline with a lethal intent. He grabbed her by the throat, his voice a low, terrifying promise of ruin. He didn't care about the social fallout or the corporate connections, he threatened to dismantle her family's entire company if she ever breathed the same air as Ava again. Later, back at her home, the adrenaline faded, leaving only a raw, aching vulnerability. Ava sat with Alex, trembling from the ordeal, and admitted the truth of her fear. She was tired of being afraid, tired of being the girl who couldn't remember her past and was terrified of the water. She looked at Alex, the man who remembered everything and feared nothing, and made a request that changed the foundation of their relationship. She asked him to help her face her greatest fear. She asked him to teach her how to swim. In that moment, the cracks in the ice were no longer just visible, the glacier was beginning to fall. For years, Ava thought her childhood was a tragic accident, but a single flash of a blue sleeve and a silver watch changed everything. Her father didn't just lie to her about the past, he was the monster in her nightmares. He hadn't just watched her drown, he had pushed her. The descent into these dark truths began with a moment of supposed celebration. Determined to crack the ice surrounding Alex, Ava had organized a surprise party for his birthday. In the glow of the decorations, the distance between them finally evaporated into a single, devastatingly passionate kiss. But the aftermath was not the fairy tale Ava expected. Almost as soon as their lips parted, Alex's mask slammed back into place. He called the kiss a mistake, a lapse in judgment that he insisted she should forget. However, the rejection wasn't born of indifference, it was born of a soul that had been shattered long ago. In the quiet that followed, the bridge of empathy was finally built when Alex shared the jagged remains of his own history. He didn't just have a cold heart, he had a haunted one, filled with the memory of seeing his family murdered before his eyes. This shared vulnerability didn't push them apart, it fused them together in a way that made their previous bickering feel like child's play. From that night on, Alex stopped being the reluctant neighbor and began to act as a provider and protector with a terrifyingly focused devotion. When Ava tried to maintain her distance, Alex pursued her with the same ruthless efficiency he used in the boardroom. He appeared at her gallery, not to argue, but to mark his territory. He gifted her a new phone to ensure she was never out of his reach and, in a breathtaking display of support and control, he purchased a $40,000 painting from the gallery just to prove he was staying exactly where he wanted to be, by her side. The final seal on their relationship was set at a luxury hotel pool. The swimming lessons had moved from the backyard to a more private, opulent setting. Ava was done with the neighborly pretense. She challenged Alex, mocking his attempt to play the saint after the heat they had shared. The provocation worked. Alex pinned her against the cold tile wall, the air between them turning to fire as he finally dropped the pretense of restraint. They moved to his penthouse, a high-rise sanctuary where the rules of their friendship were permanently discarded. In that penthouse, their world became a bubble of intense, isolated passion. Alex's need for possession was absolute, and Ava found herself surrendering to a side of herself she hadn't known existed. One afternoon, the sheer coldness of Alex's dual nature was on full display. While they were physically entwined in a moment of deep intimacy, Alex's work phone rang. Without breaking his connection to her, he took the call, conducting a lethal business negotiation in a voice as steady and frigid as a winter morning. It was a jarring reminder that while he was her lover, he was still a man who moved pieces on a global chessboard with a heart of steel. But while her life with Alex was reaching a fever pitch, the foundation of her family was beginning to crumble. Seeking to bridge the gap with her father, Michael Chen, Ava visited him at his home. The silence between them was as heavy as ever, but this time, the quiet was broken by a devastating lie coming to light. For her entire life, she had been told her mother died of a sudden heart condition. Michael, perhaps weighed down by the absence of Josh, finally admitted the truth: her mother had died of a drug overdose. The revelation left Ava reeling. Her identity, built on the idea of a mother taken by a tragic illness, was replaced by a narrative of abandonment and addiction. She felt the isolation deepening, a sense that she was being watched by a father who didn't love her, but rather feared what she might remember. A brief window of normalcy returned during the college fall fest. Amidst the seasonal treats and the laughter of her friends, Ava observed the arrival of a new player in their circle, Reese Larson, a stern and formidable bodyguard hired to protect her friend Bridget. But even the festival turned into a stage for her and Alex's growing obsession. When Alex suffered a minor cut at a booth, the trip to the campus health center turned into a steamy encounter behind closed doors, a frantic affirmation of their chemistry that left Ava feeling both exhilarated and marked by the thrill of their secret. The true breaking point, however, arrived with the Thanksgiving holiday. Ava returned to her childhood home, a place that had always felt like the epicenter of her nightmares. The dinner was a strained, silent affair, with Michael Chen's disapproval of Alex radiating through the room. That night, the dreams were more vivid than they had ever been, the dark water of the lake behind the house calling to her. The next morning, driven by a force she couldn't explain, Ava walked down to the edge of that lake. She stood on the dock, the same place where she had nearly died as a child. She had been told she fell. She had been told her mother was inside looking for sunscreen. But as she stared into the depths, the fragments of her memory finally locked into place. It wasn't a blurry nightmare anymore. It was a sharp, sensory flashback. She felt the cold air. She saw the surface of the water rising to meet her. And then, she saw the detail that changed everything: a blue sleeve and the glint of a silver watch on a hand that was not reaching out to save her, but was actively pressing her down. The hand belonged to her father. The realization was a physical blow, a scream of terror tearing from her throat as the truth of her life was rewritten in an instant. Her father hadn't lied to protect her, he had lied to hide his own attempt to end her life. When she finally found her way back to Alex, the numbness had set in. He found her withdrawn, a shell of the vibrant sunshine he had come to crave. He tried to comfort her, offering the simple warmth of hot chocolate, but the chill inside her was too deep. Finally, the words came out, heavy and jagged. She told him about the dock. She told him about the blue sleeve and the silver watch. The part ended not with a kiss, but with a vow of war. As Ava looked at the man who remembered everything, she whispered the truth that would destroy the last of her innocence. "My father didn't try to save me," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the betrayal. "He's the one who tried to kill me." Alex Volkov finally got his revenge, but it cost him the only woman he ever loved. To save Ava's life, he had to look her in the eye and tell her she was nothing but a pawn. He didn't just break her heart, he destroyed her. The collapse of Ava's world began in a sterile office, where the man she called father was finally forced into the light. Backed by Alex's lethal protective instincts and a mountain of evidence, Ava confronted Michael Chen about the memories that had returned to haunt her. She spoke of the lake, the dock, and the hand that had pressed her into the deep. Michael tried to use the familiar tools of gaslighting and dismissal, but the facade cracked when Alex intervened. Alex had spent years becoming a master of information, and he laid out the truth of Michael's history, a record of abuse, deceit, and a calculated attempt to frame Ava's mother for his own crimes. Cornered, Michael finally showed his true face, a sinister persona that confirmed Ava's worst fears. He hadn't just watched her drown, he had orchestrated the end of her innocence. By the time the confrontation ended, Michael Chen was no longer a father, he was a monster whose legacy had been systematically dismantled by the man Ava loved. In the aftermath of her family's destruction, Ava turned to Alex as her only remaining anchor. Her brother Josh returned, weighed down by the guilt of their father's actions, but it was Alex who had stood in the line of fire for her. One evening, feeling the depth of her gratitude and a connection she believed was unbreakable, Ava gathered her courage and told Alex the 3 words that changed everything. She told him she loved him. The response was a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. Alex did not reach for her. He did not blink. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that were a total void of emotion, hollow, dark, and utterly vacant. In that stillness, Ava's confession transformed from a moment of intimacy into a humiliating mistake. The man standing before her wasn't her protector, he was the machine-like figure she had feared from the very beginning. While Ava struggled with the weight of that silence, Alex was descending into his own hell. His investigation into his family's murder had led him to a truth far more poisonous than anything Michael Chen had done. Through hidden letters and financial records, he confirmed that the tragedy of his childhood wasn't a botched robbery. It had been a hit, and the mastermind was his own uncle, Ivan Volkov. The man who had raised Alex, who had fueled his fire for revenge, was the very person who had made him an orphan. Alex pivoted into a state of total, clinical vengeance. He became a ghost, moving through his life with the single-minded goal of destroying Ivan. But Ivan was a predator who knew his student well. Sensing Alex's shift in loyalty, Ivan made a desperate final play. He didn't come for Alex, he came for the only thing that could still make Alex bleed. He kidnapped Ava and her friend Bridget. The standoff took place in the shadows of Ivan's crumbling empire. Alex arrived to find Ava terrified and hurt, held as leverage by a man who believed he still held all the cards. Ivan taunted Alex, claiming that the cold CEO had grown soft because of a girl. In that moment, Alex took a lethal gamble. He knew there was only one way to save her life, he had to convince a man as ruthless as Ivan that Ava meant absolutely nothing to him. Weaponizing his own coldness, Alex looked at his uncle and spoke with clinical detachment. He didn't just lie, he performed the role of a man who saw humans as assets. He called Ava a convenient distraction and a pawn he had used to get close enough to Michael Chen to finish a job. To Ivan, it was a tactical argument. To Ava, listening in horror, the speech contained a devastating kernel of truth that shattered her more than the kidnapping ever could. The distraction worked. In the chaos that followed, Alex revealed his true checkmate. He had already poisoned Ivan. As the man who had destroyed his family began to succumb to the toxin, Alex moved with robotic precision. He freed Ava, and then, with the same hand that had once held her with such tenderness, he drew his weapon and executed his uncle. It was a clinical, blood-soaked resolution to a lifelong debt. But the physical rescue was not the end. When the sirens faded and the adrenaline died, Ava stood before him, shaking and broken. She needed him to tell her that the pawn's speech was just a performance. She needed to know that the man she loved actually existed. She asked him if it was all a lie. Alex looked at her, and in that moment, he was consumed by a self-loathing so deep he decided to destroy her love for him to set her free. He looked at the woman who had given him her soul and doubled down on the cruelty. He didn't just repeat the lie, he revealed the original sin. He watched as Ava finally connected the dots, he hadn't met her by chance. Every meeting, every accidental run-in, and even his calculated friendship with her brother, had been a cold-blooded reconnaissance mission to gather intel on her father. He was a spy who had accidentally caught feelings, and now he was choosing the mission's cold reality over her. With a voice as cold as a final execution, he delivered the final blow. "I used you, Ava," he said, his face a mask of iron. "Accept it and move on." He watched her spirit break. He watched the light finally go out in her eyes as she realized their entire beginning had been a premeditated setup. He had saved her life, but as he watched her walk away, sobbing and shattered, he knew he had successfully convinced her that the man she loved had never existed at all. Alex Volkov spent his life winning wars, but he was losing the only one that mattered. To win back his sunshine, the man who never bowed had to learn to crawl. He didn't just give her his heart, he set fire to his empire and rebuilt a world where she was the only queen. The immediate aftermath of the betrayal was not a clean break, but a slow, agonizing funeral for the life Alex had once known. As the embers of the Volkov manor rose into the night sky, Alex stood in the shadows, watching the physical representation of his past, his family's blood and his uncle's lies, turn to ash. He had finally dismantled the mastermind behind his parents' murder, yet the victory felt like a hollow, freezing void. The robot persona he had cultivated for decades was dead, buried under the weight of the girl he had intentionally shattered to set free. But the world would not let him grieve in peace. The penance began with the sound of a fist hitting bone. Josh, the man who had been his only brother in spirit, found him in the ruins. There were no words, only the raw, visceral explosion of Josh's rage. Alex did not lift a hand to defend himself. He accepted every strike, every curse, and every drop of blood he spilled on the pavement as a small down payment on the debt he owed. For the first time in his life, the physical pain was a mercy. It was a distraction from the knowledge that he had looked into the light of his life and told her she was a pawn. While Alex was drowning in the wreckage of Washington, D.C., a world away, Ava was learning how to breathe again. London offered her a grey, rainy sanctuary, a place where she was not the girl who had nearly drowned or the pawn of a billionaire, but simply a talented photographer with a future. For months, she walked the cobblestone streets, her camera acting as a shield between her and the memories of the man who had used her. The turning point came on a night when the London sky opened up. Ava stood before an empty swimming pool, the surface of the water rippling under the heavy rain. In the past, this sight would have paralyzed her. But that night, she didn't wait for a hand to guide her or a protector to watch the edge. She dove in. She swam through the cold, dark water alone, pushing through the sensory echoes of the lake and the silver watch. When she emerged, gasping and triumphant, she wasn't just a survivor of a childhood accident, she was a woman who had reclaimed her own power. She proved to herself that she could stay afloat without the man who had once been her anchor and her storm. Her peace was shattered when the ghost of her past appeared on a London street corner. Alex did not arrive with the cold arrogance of a CEO, he looked like a man who had walked through a war zone and lost. The shock of his presence was followed by a revelation that fundamentally rewrote who she thought he was. Alex hadn't just flown across the Atlantic to offer an apology. He had walked away from the Archer Group. He had resigned, trading the power, the influence, and the empire he had spent his life building for a single, desperate chance to exist in her orbit. He was no longer the man who moved the pieces, he was a man who had sacrificed the board just to be near the Queen. For weeks, he became a shadow in her life, not as a spy, but as a suitor who had finally learned the meaning of consistency. He brought her favorite treats, he left tokens of a man who remembered every detail of her heart, and he waited. He did not demand, he endured. The final wall fell at a grand exhibition in Shoreditch. The gallery was filled with the elite of the art world, all gathered to witness the rise of the woman Diane Langer had called a prodigy. Ava stood amidst her work, portraits of raw human connection, feeling the pride of her own success. But the night reached a fever pitch when the music started. Alex took the stage, sitting at a grand piano in front of the very people he once looked down upon with clinical detachment. He didn't give a speech about business or power. He played. He sang a raw, soulful song of redemption that stripped away the last of his armor. To see the Ice Prince break his mask in public, to hear him lay his heart bare for a room full of strangers just to reach the one woman in the back, was the ultimate surrender. It was the death of the original sin. In the quiet alcove after the performance, the truth finally had its day. Their final conversation was not one of excuses, but of profound accountability. Alex admitted that the pawned speech had been a lethal lie to save her life, but the deeper betrayal was his own darkness. He confessed that he was the one who had truly been used by his trauma and his thirst for vengeance, and that she was the only real thing he had ever touched. He didn't ask her to forgive him, he simply showed her that he had rebuilt a world where her happiness was the only mission that mattered. Ava looked at the man who had crawled through his own wreckage to find her. She realized that while he had been a spy who caught feelings, he was now a man whose devotion was fiercer than any mission. She chose to lower the final gate. 1 year later, the light has returned to stay. In a sun-drenched studio overlooking the city, Ava moves with the confidence of an internationally celebrated photographer. There is a ring on her finger, a permanent promise, but it is the joy in her eyes that marks her true success. She is no longer looking for the light, she is the source of it. And beside her stands Alex, a man who still possesses the intensity of a predator, but one whose focus is now entirely dedicated to the woman who saved him from the ice. Their love is no longer a twisted thing of secrets and lies, it is a fierce, healthy devotion that has survived the fire. But as one story finds its peace, another is just beginning to burn. Back in the halls of the royal palace, a different kind of tension is rising. Princess Bridget von Ascheberg stands at a balcony, the weight of a crown she never wanted pressing down on her shoulders. Behind her, standing like a wall of granite, is Rhys Larson. His expression is professional, his posture perfect, but as their eyes meet in the reflection of the glass, the air between them thickens with a forbidden electricity. He is a man of duty, and she is a woman of the state, but the look in his eyes says he would tear down a kingdom to keep her safe. The games of the heart are over for Alex and Ava, but for the princess and her guard, the most dangerous game of all has only just begun.